Welcome, Parkside Kids. Today I want to start out with a fun bubble activity. So I'm going to blow some bubbles, and I want you to count how long it takes until they pop. Ready? How long did that take? Do you think it took maybe a few seconds? I think so. So they really don't last that long. So the average lifespan of a bubble is measured in seconds, where the average lifespan of a person in the US is about 78 years. But today we're going to hear about a promise that God made to King David. God told King David that his kingdom would last not 80 years, not even 800 years, but forever. I can't wait for you guys to hear this story.
Hi kids, this story is from 2 Samuel chapters 6 and 7. So God had chose David to be the next king of Israel. At this time King Saul had died, and God gave his people a time of peace under King David. King David lived in a beautiful palace in the city of Jerusalem. One day, David was talking with Nathan, the prophet. David said, "I live in a palace of nice cedar wood, but the ark of God sits in a tent." Remember, the ark was holy. To them, it was the representation of God on earth. It hardly seemed fair that it should live in a tent. David wanted to build a temple for the ark of God. Nathan said, "God is with you. Do what you want." But God did not want David to do whatever he wanted. God wanted David to do what God wanted. That night, God gave Nathan a message for David. This is what God told Nathan to say. "David, are you going to build a house for me to live in? I brought my people out of Egypt. I gave them leaders to guide them. The entire time I have been with them, my house has been a tent. Did I ever ask anyone to build a temple for me? You used to be a shepherd, David, but I made you a king. I helped you defeat your enemies, and my people now live peacefully in their own land." Psst, you guys, I love how God responded to David's desire to build a temple. God reminded David that he doesn't need anything from people. He made David into a mighty king, and he never asked for a temple to replace the tabernacle. In a way, it's kind of like God said, "I appreciate your concern, but if I needed a temple, I could make myself one." God did not need David, but he had chosen to use David anyway. And God's plans for David were even bigger than David could have imagined. God said, "I promise you, David, that you and your descendants will be kings. When you die, one of your sons will be king. He will be a strong king, and no one will be able to take his kingdom away from him. He will build a house for me. I will love him, and I will never leave him. When your son dies, his son will be king. Someone in your family will be king forever." Nathan told David everything God said. David went into the tent he had set up for the ark of the Lord, and he prayed, "God, I don't deserve anything you have done for me, and you promised to do so much more. You are great. There is no one like you. You chose the Israelites to be your own people. You rescued them from slavery in Egypt. God, please keep your promises. I know your words are always true." God said that instead of David making a house for him, he would make a house for David. But God wasn't talking about a physical building to live in. God meant that he was going to give David's family an important and everlasting purpose. God explained that he would use David's family for the most wonderful part of his plan. God promised that the Messiah would come from David's family. The Messiah! When God told David that one of his descendants would be king forever, God was talking about Jesus.
In our story today, we learned about God's faithfulness. He had been faithful to David, whom he had chosen to be king, and he made a promise to David that he would continue to be faithful for generations to come. I have here some of the things God had already done for David and the Israelites, and some things he promised he would do. So I have two buckets here. One says, "I have," and one says, "I will." And we're going to listen to the promise and see if it's something that God had already done or God was going to do. So our first one says, "Brought the Israelites out of Egypt." Had God already done that, or was he going to do that? That's an "I have." Here's another promise. Been moving around with a tent as my dwelling. Is that something God was already doing or will do? That's another I have. I have been moving around with a tent as my dwelling. Make a great name for you. Is that something God had already done, or was that a promise he made to David? I will make a great name for you. Next one says, never asked my people to build me a house. Where do you think this one goes? Right, I have never asked my people to build me a house. Designate a place for my people Israel. Yep, I will. I will designate a place for my people Israel. Made you a ruler over my people. Where does this one go? You're right. That was one he had done. That was to David. I have made you a ruler over my people. Establish the throne of his kingdom forever. That's a will. That's something God will do. He will establish his kingdom forever. Been with you wherever you have gone. Where do you think this one goes? Yep, I have. God had been with them wherever they had gone, even wandering through the wilderness for 40 years. What about this one? Give you rest from all your enemies. That's in will. God is going to give them rest. Destroyed all your enemies. That one goes in the I have. That's something he had already been doing. And last two. Raise up a descendant and establish his kingdom. Where does this one go? Yep, I will. Do you know who that descendant is that he raised up? Jesus. And the last one, be his father and he will be my son. Once again, that's I will. He will be his father and he will be my son. And remember, he's talking about Jesus. And the last thing real quick is I wanted to tell you that in the Bible, not only did God make promises just to David and the Israelites, he makes so many promises that apply to us today. So here are just a couple promises that God has promised you that he will be faithful to answer in your life. He promises, I will help you. And that you can find that in Psalm 121, 1 and 2. He promises, I have a special plan for your life. And you can find that in Jeremiah 29, 11. And finally, God promises, I will be with you always. And that's in Deuteronomy 31, 8. We know he will be faithful to keep these promises because he keeps all of his promises. Okay, let's practice our key passage this week. Here we have all the words, but they're mixed up. Can you help me put them back in order? What comes first? Your kingdom. Now what comes? Is an everlasting kingdom. Do you know what's next? And your dominion endures through all generations. Good job. What comes next? The Lord is trustworthy in all his promises. What's next? And faithful in all he does. And it's from Psalm 145:13. Great job. Have a great week.